Chum dun ding gong bo jang bo yang la xiang za lo. Gong ge lu zhu zhum ni zhum zhe ni de nam da ra zhe bi. Zhe ni dong ge zhi zhe zhi zhe ni ji da ge ra la wa. Gong da zhi bi zhu re ma ru mun dong deng re ji zhe re. Zhu zhu ge la wa zhi. Yang la zhu jie yang dong zhong zhi de re jie zhong. Nyang mo nyang lo li jie zha zhong zhong zai. Dunguran yaga janye jamza ra jana dunne da jan sab jin da zo yan da le zo ya de do chu cha ju da janye yan je da lo ma jawara yang la da da umara bazana da umara bazana da umara bazana da umara bazana umara bazana da umara bazana da umara bazana da umara bazana da umara bazana Umara bazanardo, umara bazanardo, umara bazanardo, umara bazanardo, umara bazanardo. Zeduna jijim jero ozere je dalo dama mambaraz. Damju jolo dombai, luju rubi nawa jeda soro. Nyarji jimbo zudun nimeja. Zoni molon jimbo ngabjada, bakara dangam santu jermat. Tumba dikje jala jangzar lo. Ya, tani terang dana yung kan samala tomar gongmo delakan samjigin.
I'd like to first say good evening to everybody who has come here tonight.
Tani ngaso terang dinang la te ngaso pobare. Tani Australia tani 사찬디 머제 tani 머그 잠바야 가시가시 요사레 tani 가서 참마 냠든 좀네 tani 갑다든 디숑 있고 급든 디숑 알아테 페 가보숑송.
Tonight we have some Tibetans in the audience. We have people originally from Australia and probably some people from other places too. And that we are all here tonight for this opportunity to engage in dialogue is something I'm very happy about.
Tani rugpa chutsoko nala tani ngarang tari thangni payin.
This is my second time to come to a Rigpa center.
Tangbote ngarang nanang lola tani sinini tani rugpa chutsoko nala yang sone samala kapda shipayin.
Last year I was able to come to the Rigpa Center in Sydney and give a teaching.
Tani sorgerambo chedang tani ngarang so lama yujin noro tani kharang so tani hajang thugnang thambo tani.
Sodyo Rinpoche and my Lama, our Lama, are very close.
Tani sorgerambo chelanga nitong chibshigo lola tani Oxford la tani thugsong.
And I met Sodyo Rinpoche in person in 2014 in Oxford.
Tani yang ti hon la tang ti ji la yang tani nga so kabar yang kashi jamne kabar kanang la tani kabda tani sheji tani shongsong.
Before our meeting and as well as after our meeting, we spoke on the telephone several times.
Tani sorgerambo che khong gas tani Australia la khong la tani chusok tani yo karti nga tani roji resona Australia la tani roji tani korko shongsona tani khorang chusok na la chi phemna yakbore sone tani songdu.
And Sodyo Rinpoche said to me that he has Dharma centers in Australia and that if the opportunity were to arise that I went to Australia, that I would be very welcome to visit there.
Tani nanang re talo re tani nga tsu nga korma nila tani Australia la yungji tani korkab re song tani tang nanang yang rikpa chusok na la songba yin talo yang tani ta yungwi jimsen tani yins.
So it's my second time to Australia now, last year and then this year. So last year was my first visit to Rigpa and that's why I am here the second time.
Tani ngay tana nga tsu bok lama mambo zitani ta lo jibje ngabje sumche tani ka gong la tani nufshok la zambulang ka sacha mambo la sone tani korang tso tani mi mambo mi haliba mambo la ndrewa tani lama ta loma tindi guni tindi ndirashini tindi mimambo zambalang kasakalandus.
It seems to me that 30 years ago, 40 years ago, within the past 30 or 40 years, that many Tibetan lamas have made their way all around the world and have established connections, teacher-student connections in many places.
Tini din nangla tini tayona ngarang choga tini lama choga loma mangbozi pena nushukuma to soyuna pena korang lama la tini tini lo sunchiyin ziyanda da lo jibchiyin ziyanda da tini lo ngabchiyin ziyanda da mi mangbo tini res.
And Khenpo has observed that in this time there are many people who have relied on their Lama for periods of time of 30 years, 40 years, and even in some cases 50 years. He's seen many examples of this long-term teacher-student relationship.
Tini nge tayona tini yindi nga tsum mi mangbozi tini lama chila tini sim tambo shini pe yin rangbo la tini lojong shiya ta tini sheyo sari te pe yangbo res.
And I see this reliance on a teacher in a long-term sense, in a really stable way. I view this as a very positive thing.
Tini lama chila tini yin rangbo la tini chu nyen, tini damngak yakbo nyen, tini nyamlin yakbo che, tini shena tini susu la sim kuto la tini yargi halipa yakbo yung res.
And like this, to remain with a teacher in a long-term sense and to listen to their teachings and put them into practice is something that can bring one great benefit. This is a very great thing.
Teni chabarda nga tso sangak dorji thakpazeya te teli janga tso lama da lumma parla teni mjirwa te la te kocho halipa karchimbu tsagres.
And particularly in terms of the Vajrayana, the relationship between teacher and student is especially important.
Teni susu ranga lama te la taba yakbo ja, teni yichi yakbo she, teni yin rangbo la teni ta nyamlin teni she na, teni semgu tola pe halipa panto chimbo yungre.
And so to place trust in a teacher, place one's trust and faith in a teacher and rely on them in a long-term sense, one is able to gain great benefit in this way.
Teni nga tso bok chuze nandra, teni sangak dorji thakbaze nandra, di nangla, teni lama, teni ten. Ta lama ten sarvi jini, tso de lama de gandri guni ten go rezina, tso de lama ga song ya ga chu de, suso ga nyamlin yak boshi ya. Ta de lama ten ya ga teni ten sar tapshi yak shu de rezi.
So whether we say Tibetan Buddhism or Vajrayana, the most important thing is relying on one's teacher. And the way that this is done is to take what our Lama teaches us and put it actually into practice. This is the best way of relying on a teacher.
Tani ta lama tinni nga tso kare je go rezina tso de chula lojong sia ta. Tani lojong che sarvi jini so gom gyamne nyamlin chia tso de ti ni rez.
So when we talk about having a teacher, relying on a teacher, really we're talking about two things. First, receiving their teachings and then putting them into practice through meditation, these two things.
Tani nga tso sharshok la perna tani yang lama tenjeta, lama tembi jini, yang tani lama la leka mambo le roba chia data, tani lama la gormo mambo tani parwa data, tani shinkani mambo yore. Jete te lama tensar te savati te marese, te gubatso te marese.
In the East, for a lot of people who, after finding a teacher, assist them in many ways through various, in various kinds of work, or they support them financially. This is not what we mean in essence, though, when we talk about relying on a teacher.
Tindi indi ta nga tso ta sashok mangbo zula, tini nga tso poka tini lama mangbo ten, tini lojong shi, tini gom gyab tindi shi ne, 망보 든지 더 시행도지 다가 손잡을랑 그 사차 망보 라든지 시행도 대 할리바 가르친 보즈렌도스.
So the fact that in many parts of the world, all over, there are people taking teachers, receiving their teachings and putting them into practice through meditation is an extremely important thing.
Teni namateni soso chu lojongshiyata gomgyawata titsokkorwate ngacho murg jamba na pena nfshok manjawta yang teni chi kharshok yena yang ji yaminjata tso na la yang teni mangbondus.
So relying on a teacher, learning the Dharma, putting it into practice, whether Westerners or people from other places, Chinese people included, there are a lot of people doing this.
Teni ngacho terang ngacho na boba yang mambozun duse. Yena ngacho boba la yena peda ngacho bola phayar la samlo tangna ngacho boganjing ke jong mus tang se na chula tapate pe yakbo yores.
Tonight we have a lot of, or several mini Tibetans amongst us. In general, when we speak of Tibet or our people from the snowlands, we regard ourselves as ones with a very good faith in the Dharma.
Taba yakbo yore te yena tini ngacho ta perna 저 진짜말랑 그 가사 가와라 가서 보바가 추석배 망보래 추석양 망보래 추석 요사 디나 가서 보바가 망석양 되니 망본도 옛날 되니 가서 보바가 망석돼서 추석 나란도니 소용 되니 신ken 되지 용용인도지.
Despite this, in many places there are Dharma centers, Tibetan Buddhist Dharma centers, and there are Tibetan communities as well. However, among Tibetans, the number of people who visit Dharma centers to study the Dharma and practice it are very few.
Teni 대전 주고 말해 가서 답아요 받지 보고 조금 말해 가서 인다만다 가서 배나 답아요야다 되니 소소고 마늘 장야다 겸준도야다 대소다 배 약보리다 이나 테스트 보고 용거 말해 가서 보바 소양 인다만다 대 산에 대라 요비 되니 추석 뒤나란 존이 로종 제거래.
Have faith in itself is not really enough. In addition to having this faith, chanting our mantras and the other things that we do, really it's important that we should be studying the Dharma as well.
Teni ngacho nangba sangji ba chuzya de teni the jabachi bo teni nyamse lenya da lojong shia teni is mareze ngacho jabayin nanja teni ngacho khyambayin nanja susu changma nyamlin shina changma lojong shina teni jukure.
So when we speak of the Buddha Dharma, we shouldn't think that it's just something for the ordained, for monks, etc. The Dharma is something that lay people and ordained people alike can practice.
Teni ngacho nangba ge chu nangla perna geser gerlung go domba te ngacho merkya pomo go teni jijiyo mare korang rapshung da jena ma to yo mare ma to ba tes chupo ma to jamba teni ngacho chu gang nyamling jena ngacho nangba nangla yo bi chu changma te dorji thaba yenare teni thaba chimbo gang dang kang yenna ngacho merkya pomo go changma nyamling jena chokure.
With the exception of the monastic vows, the Getsul vows and the Gilung vows, with the exception of these vows, there is no other Dharma that lay people can't practice. So regardless of whether it's Mahayana teachings or Vajrayana teachings, all of these are open to lay people as they are to those who are ordained.
다 딘디 연사티 디니 가서 토머 가서 드니 추 냠린제나 So
if we are going to be practitioners of the Buddha Dharma, the first thing that we need to do is to learn about it, to study.
Teni yung rangboz ke nangla lojong shina teni takzo ngaso leka yakboz sosorang ka lagla yung gres.
It's the same logic as undertaking a worldly kind of activity as well. We have a an order or a process of education that we need to go through, from the different levels of schooling through to graduate education, and after we've attained the appropriate qualification or training, then we are able to engage in the actual practice of work properly.
Teni lojong yakboz machina ngazo teni lojong suso lojong yakboz machina te jigbare ngazo chudrub gonaya ngazo dribshi ga marezi ta ngazo jikting ga ngazo teni lobda chimo nalan roya ta tesud gangrezi ngazo chin de donda ka don je te yinna tela lojong teni rangbo che go re te na ngazo tele kyang yin rangbo chin de dang teni che shima ta yin rangbo ga donda teni takjo yakbo she go na.
And so it's the same with the practice of the Dharma. So going to a university and studying is obviously for purposes in this lifetime. Nevertheless, it's something that we commit a lot of our time to. So considering that the practice of the Dharma is something that is relevant not only to this life but to many, many lives to come, then it's all the more important that we first learn about it before we're able to properly put it into practice.
Tindi insarti teni ngasola taba yakbo yore te ina taba chibo teni njigmare te taba chibo da teni ngaso shangchaya da teni katun don bando ya da teni manu jang ya da to so te yakbo re ngaso go re te ina te chibo yongmare ngaso sama lojong che go re.
So faith in itself then is really not enough. So doing prostrations and doing recitations, counting prayers on our mala, etc. All of these things are good, but in themselves not enough. It's really important that we also learn about the content of the Dharma.
Teni lojong che gona teni ngaso lojong ko chakin tangbu de gangrezina teni ngaso lama yakbo yo go rezi te pe jangna ngaso lobja ga nanglan to ni lojong yakbo che gona teni girgin yakbo yo go re girgin yakbo mena teni ngaso jima teni lojong che na yang teni ta lomtar simpi ne kumna yangje 야보 연금문도와 대당 잡보리 당보 가서 레카 당보 곰바 당보 데 강레즈나 되는 가서 라마 약보즈 되니 잘고 그래 대 곰바 당보레스.
The first step then of studying the Dharma is to find a qualified lama. It's the same logic again as if we're in a normal school. Without a proper teacher, it's not possible for us to really attain good results. So the first thing, it's really important to have a good teacher, a good lama.
Tani lama ziati pena ngaso langkhor ka nala yo piteni lamtum shenkan GPS je. O tetan rabores.
So what do we mean when we say a lama? Well, it's the same function, say, as a GPS system in a car.
Teni karde ngaso lama de yakboz mayna, teni ngaso lam yakba nala rotab ko marze pena GPS korang ka malak di nala teni kyonyo na, teni ngaso sharshok lan rogo na korang ka ngaso noshok la chenro re.
So it's the importance of having a teacher is to lead us in the proper direction. It's as if the GPS system has a fault, then when we want to go in one direction, it will lead us in the other.
Tani ta ngaso lama de kan rizi yong go rezena ta lama ngaso chu na lama ga tini chanyet ze go na lama ga tini charge mambo songdu ina ta lama hali pa tini yabora go na te ze khabores.
In terms of how we distinguish what or who a good lama is, there are many different grades and distinctions that are made in terms of a lama's qualification. Obviously, finding a truly excellent Supreme Lama is not an easy thing.
Teni lama ga teni charge de la teni thumbu da teni mamu da teni ni yore se teni chin thumbu da teni chi mabo teni ga yola ti partila mambo zindu ta te kang ragna chokore chin thumbu da ragna da antang bore se yena ta mashu ti yena da korang la charge yore tele masuna teni go mares.
So in terms of the spectrum of teachers, it obviously goes from those at the very apex to those rather at the very bottom. Actually, the best thing, of course, is to have someone at the very top, but actually to have a teacher that falls anywhere in the spectrum is acceptable. Obviously, if they fall below the baseline standard, that's not acceptable.
다디 나니 가서 마슈티 가레진다서 가서 마슈티 당가서 투슈티 가서 대람시아 금면서 가서 마슈가 라마 마슈가 차지데 간디스고나 간디스고레제나지.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that baseline standard is. What is that minimum standard? So we won't talk about the top of the top, but let's just talk about what that basic standard is.
Teni lamate rangdonda jantuniga nani zoti jantun shinken tenis gores.
In terms of selfishness and altruism, the Lama should be chiefly and primarily oriented towards altruism.
Teni zuzina rangdon tsawani meba tenis yonata te pehale pa yapores reta te kabore te ragona te kamores yina rangdon te yona zoti teni jamba ton shinken tenis yina tenga so lamala kelen shinan jukures.
Of course, it would be wonderful to have a Lama who had no self-interest or no selfishness whatsoever. This, of course, is something very difficult to find in a teacher. So in terms of assessing whether or not they are qualified in this minimum sense, what we should assess is whether of the two, they are primarily and in the majority concerned with others.
Then, chudang jikten niga nani zodi chushin kan tenis gores itanga chun jikten tsavane yo mayo meken tenis gores na te goti gore te kabore te na jikten te yona zodi chushin kan tenis gores.
And another thing is in terms of the balance between a teacher who is worldly oriented and Dharma oriented. Obviously, it's they should be more oriented towards the Dharma. Being somewhat worldly oriented, then, this is not necessarily a real problem. It's wonderful, of course, to have a teacher who is purely oriented towards the Dhamma, but again, this is something that is difficult to find.
Then lamate zo nga sola chu teni lomken teni kwarang zo kwarang ga chu dum kan teni go re ma to ba teni kwarang gen jikten perna nga zo kwarang ga teni gormo mombo soya da teni kwarang ga gajagda teni ta teni kwarang yang teni ta la sam lo tang teni ngarang sola yang teni ta shen dena tenga zo pan to yo ma re.
And the reason that we need such a teacher to be primarily oriented towards the Dharma is that if their concern is rather for wealth or for fame, then in relying on such a teacher, this won't bring us any benefit.
Teni somebody kan rezina teni chin dodang teni che shima ni ga nani zo te teni ta che shima panchu landang jamken teni go res.
And another binary, I suppose, that we use to distinguish a Lama who is qualified is whether or not they are concerned primarily with this life or, in fact, future lives. And a preferable Lama or qualified teacher is one who is really concerned with our future well-being.
Shima panchula teni dang ma gemne teni ngarang so che ndi thola te pena nga so khangba chimbo nyoya te langkor zugbo nyoya teni gormo mangbo soya tenji ta nga so la lob dena che shima la pampa yo ngeng chuda tenji nga so la mahlabna te phanto yo mare te indi chend dang shima ni na la zo ti shima pancho jenken teni zgores.
So what we mean by this is, in terms of being more concerned about future existences than this one, is that if our teacher were to advise us to buy a big house or make lots of money, buy a big car, etc., and not be concerned with our dharmic progress in this life and those to come, then this would not, again, bring us any benefit.
Tati ndur dini sha na te nga so lama de tindis go re so de nga so boba chu na la tindis song ya re.
So just in a few sentences, this is the minimum requirement that a Lama we take should possess, and this is how it is said in the Buddhist teachings.
Tani ta tindi lama te la tenni ta nga so leka kadile go re guba kare re zena tani nga so sin di thola se shima ga thola tani nga so pena jiting kun chwa ga na la ina re tani le dong ga thola ina re te so na la tani nga so pena gormo jibo ga takshu shi go na takshu shi matap ke tani nga so jiting ga tani te ta tabshi pena nga so jiting ga la yang tabshi mambo yo re 디 탑시 디소고 탁슈시고나 탁슈시 마트비 딘지가 돈다서 탁슈시야가 돈도 되는 가서 라마 땡그레스 데라 땡고레스.
So in respect of what matters are we relying on a lama for? Well, in terms of this life and in future lives, there are many issues, I suppose, that worldly means can address or solve. Many things that money can address. However, the reason that we are relying on a teacher is to address problems or issues that are not resolvable by these means.
Then jitinga shawanga jitinga tabla tini tachushi toya tesoda lama mena yang ngaso bena ta bena poajina ngaso zamazana njungjore te lama go mare then ngaso karkumna chinthongna te renjore te lama go mare then ngaso jab 장모 쇼나 되니 곰바고나 데 가서 렌조레 데 라마고 마레 덴디티 콜라 라마고 마레 덴지팅 그 탑시레스.
In terms of those things that can be addressed through worldly or mundane means, there's no need for us to have a lama. So if we're hungry, we can eat something. If we're thirsty, we can drink something. If we're cold, we can put on clothes. So obviously these are not matters that we need the guidance of a teacher for.
Then 다 라마 템바 구바티 강레즈나 가서 지팅 거더니 탑시티솔라 때니 탁쇼자바니시 마탑비 덴지거 덴지 무바 덴지 무여 침보 차즘 톰보 덴디스가 돌아 덴이 상로 땅네 돈 야침보 덴디즘 저비아가 돈도 덴이 가서 라마텐 출라로종시 덴디시 그레스.
So the purpose or our goal in relying on a teacher is to achieve or resolve those matters that it isn't possible to do through these worldly means. So these are really vast, important, great matters.
Tani ta terang achogo di terang achogo tini ta chachil katini kapshangdi tani tangrab katini hajang yukpin chowa ti nangla tani chula tani kalayeshi ni tez tamon rawo sheyala kandi chego rezi ni ta ngacho kapshangda tindizres.
So the topic for this evening's teaching was amid this extremely hectic, fast-paced modern life of ours, how to go about practicing Buddhism in a slow and stable way.
Tani ngacho tarta ngacho joa muzina tani ngacho ju donir zina追求 donir shi ke mambo yore ze ngacho gang donir shi na chokore ze te ngacho mu imbi gimsin gi reze karte ngacho tari mu mayna pena ngacho tonron ra o tin rizina tani ngacho la damga mambo yo mare ze shwenze damga mambo yo mare ta korang ge ju zaza ya da chintong ya da de tin jin o ma to ban damga mambo yo mare tani ngacho mu zina tin damga pe mambo reze damga mambo yo reze.
So being human beings, being in this human form, we have naturally many desires, many things that we pursue. And this is part and parcel of being a human. If we were an animal, there naturally wouldn't be so many choices we'd be presented with in terms of everything, in terms of what we eat, what we do, what we drink, etc. There wouldn't be all these choices.
Teni tanangacho teni rigba chuchoko nangla yongkan ga teni loma choyena teni parchir teni gacho chu tarwanda da teni chu sangnak dorji tabada teni ga teni chu ngone changne chu jimkhan teni tata yensares.
It strikes me that the students here in the Rigpa Center are committed to the path of liberation and are students, sincere students of the Vajrayana.
Teni jamba ngaso terandina la yongkan samala samlo tang yongna ngaso parchir teni chubang ngoman rawo teni chu ngoni to tonir shinken tindi yin sa res.
And that among other people here tonight too, that they are sincere practitioners of the Dharma.
Tini tindi yin na, de ngarang tso derang chatra ka kapshang de tindi zire da yin na, tini nga tso zo de zi chu ngoman rabu shini tini shia gusa res.
So given this to be the case, despite the fact that the topic is talking about practicing Buddhism in a fast modern lifestyle, I'd really like to give a teaching on real Dharma.
Teni nga tsong ngama, teni tirab jibdimba, jogyepa, jirgaba, teni nga kaps nga tsong me tsangma, teni pamjur tartan rabu, teni yargimayin bikawre, ti kaps nga tsong jinjua mi tsangma nga samlo kanti samgawa rezina, teni nga tsong pamjur yargi chimbon ro, teni jiyo mangbo yo, teni resona, teni nga tsong natun tsangma, ti takshu shetabga res samni, mi mangbo zga teni samgawa res.
So in bygone centuries, in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, the level of economic development was nothing like it is today, and many people felt that a great many issues and problems could be solved by economic means.
Ti na tarta nga so perna tirmni chakchik ba tin rin rowi kapsa tini mi mangbo sala tini ta pe halle ba ga tini pamjur ko longshul halle ba jachimbo reze jachimbo rete yina tini mote so tini demo ke boda semkham ko tola ke bo yong yo mare te medi tini mi mangbo ka yangcher samlo tane o nga so tini pamjur yarge sona tini nga so natun thamshi thachar thachupshi thosong samba samlo teten chung mendo samni
However, now in the 21st century, in a time of unprecedented material development, there are many people who are in fact not satisfied in many respects, and many people are reconsidering very strongly the idea that economic development can in itself solve everything.
Teni samlo te nga tso teni ta nangba chu nala te ngama ni te hale pa pe saru chini teni shevja yo ba teni zres.
However, this notion that there are things that cannot be addressed through material or external or economic means is something that has been key to Buddhism from the very beginning.
Teni nga tso nangba karise ndu zina nga tso woma jigya ba ki teni yores ti nangla karise yores na so shitsoko nala yongken ge meitiso shitsoko ramba mamu meitiso zo li ge dingmer de yores ta koranso ngarchur mambo jabgore kable mambo jabgo leka mambo legore koranso li libo to di dingmer de pe mambo yores.
So in terms of the religious view on it, there are In the Womajidya, it said that there are different levels of suffering. In the 400 Madhyamaka verses, it said it's the different levels of suffering spoken of. And one type is suffering that is chiefly derived from physical suffering.
Jada, teni wangcha yongkenda, teni shikboda deso, ramban tombo deso na, teni sem gedungwer de pe halipa mambo yores.
And that kind of suffering that's primarily derived from physical sources tends to be the kind endured by people at the bottom of society. And it's said that those who have high positions, have wealth or power, business people and leaders and the like, the suffering that they mainly endure tends to be of a mental type. So of these two types of suffering, physical suffering and mental suffering, whether it's people at the lower end of society or the higher end of the society, either way, these two types of suffering are suffered by people every single day.
Teni dungorla de tati yanche de ngetari oma jibjawana la shapateri shatsarson. Teni dungorla ramba mamoda teni dungorla yang ramba thumbo dungorla yang teni mamodam thumbo teni yores.
And then in terms of suffering, we can talk about low-level suffering and high-level suffering.
Teni deshkit la yang teni ramba mamoda teni ramba thumbo teni yores.
And we can say the same of happiness, lower-level happiness and higher-level happiness.
Teni ngatsun roa mir ngatsun jitim ba chogo teni dungor par mebashi ya teni dungor de kangrezena teni mang cheshu teni dungor ramba mamode res.
And from a worldly perspective, when we talk about doing away with suffering, we're really talking about lower level suffering.
Teni dungor ramba mashuti kangrezena perna zamaza ya mepada komba kyunya mepada yana zamaza komba kyungi yona yang mambu mepanda ta teni perna ngarang yakbo yona teni mus jambaza yang ngarang tan rabo yena teni tela margawan chakdong rawoda teni yana me jamba chila ngarang cholang ne teni sim marki ban rawoda tenji korwa dungor te sama dungor ramba mawo teres.
So this kind of low-level suffering is not having enough to eat and drink, or having food to eat and things to drink, but not having as much as another person, and on that basis generating anger and jealousy. These are all lower-level types of suffering.
Teni dungor ramba te tsum thumbuti kangrezena tanga so jitingo tola nga so gormo mambo yo teni khangba yo langkhor zigpo yo teni tanga so ji mang yo kachak yo teni changma yo chabi ji ne teni yang nga so sem gna la tongbare ne teni yang dungor jamba chi yongore te dungor thumbo je gona dungor chawun ra ores ta dungor ramba thumbo yana dungor tang zapun ra ores tang zabo teres.
And the other kind of suffering, whether we call it higher level suffering or greater suffering or deeper suffering or more profound suffering, is that which is derived from having a lot, whether it's a lot of wealth, a nice house, a nice car, and the sense of emptiness and ennui that comes from this.
Teni dungor ramba mashu te dungor le lapo te so na teni nga chun jitinga teni pela nga chu pamjori ya je tangyan ra da tso la teni te thachu she thabgres.
In terms of the lower level suffering, it's certainly possible that by improving our economic circumstances that we are able to address this kind.
Teni dungor tang zapo teni dungor te so na teni nga so pamjoriya jin ro ta teni kadra yo ta tso ko chawani meba shi thab ko mares.
However, the high level suffering or the profound suffering that I spoke of is not something that can be addressed through getting more fame or getting more money.
Teni nga so muschik la samlo tang bayen na tangbo nga so dungor te ni di na ni dungor gang dang chan ro re na tangbo nga so dungor mashu ti da chak re nga so parchi teni nga so mannam ke perna ngaman ra ore pamjori ya ji masong e kaps teni mi mambo la za ji mi mambo kyungi mi mambo nana te manju she go na she mathav teni sacha jambalan ro go na teni kable mambo jab teni ra bore tangbo nga so chowa na ni dungor ni ga na ni dungor mashu te tang nga so chan ro res.
In terms of a chronology of encountering suffering, it's likely that we would first encounter the suffering of that lower level nature, of not being able to have enough of whatever we need, and on that basis having to go somewhere else to find it and endure a lot of hardship on that basis. It's probable that we would encounter this kind of suffering first.
Teni dungor te so tham jipong nga chun shok la teni lo ni gya da jipchu ngap chu kong la teni zole sarji yung ne tarta part teni me mambo kable mambo jab teni char ka laksar yarje tang zole yarje tang ne teni zoda na ne lek thonje mambo shone ta tarta nga chu pamjo yarje so drumdr yenare teni chen tong ya yenare kang thola na pe tab debo shi ore ti jimsin ji dungor tangbo te yang te meban ro chawane mebada mare ta te cheshong lan ro yores.
So after 200 or 300 years of the industrial revolution coming to pass and all the inventions and scientific discoveries and technology that emerged from this process, the great hardships that people endured over these centuries, it can be said that this lower level kind of suffering has been to a certain extent reduced. Of course, it's not been eradicated completely, but it's probably of a lesser nature than what it might have been originally in many places.
다리디 이나 가서 밤줄 yargi hale 본조 드니 차르그 락서 hale 바 yargin조 차르디 드니 가서 등으로 니바데 당가서 창말 때던 차용고요. 그래서 가서 식보이나래 드니 차르그 바이나래 드니 머스당스이나 드니 등으로 니바데던 차니 미남 그 셈그나라 마키바 망보 드니 셈금그나라 낫 망보 쇼네 드니 페나 동서기나 이위전 대소코라데 망보 용네 드니 다 참아 양길 드니 가서 등으로 니바딘지단 찬조요.
So after, at this point in time where all of these various developments have been accomplished, many people are really coming into this second phase of suffering, the mental suffering that I spoke about. And on this basis, many people are experiencing all kinds of mental illness, depression in particular, these kinds of symptoms.
드니 등물은 이빠데 드니 메바지야 돈도 드니 망보고 삼로 망보 미망보고 삼로 땅거요래 자버도 셈금르 바다 또 소에 나더니 삼로 망보 땅거요래 데 있니 다티 바르도 드니 고랑가 탁조시야가 탑시 약보스 자요 말레스 녀요 말레스.
In terms of addressing or resolving this second kind of suffering, it's something that many people consider. It's something that a lot of thought is currently being given to, especially among psychologists or in the psychological realm. However, up until this time, it must be said that no particularly convincing or strong method or means has been found for eradicating this kind of suffering.
드니다 등으로 니빠데 드니다 메바지고나 드니 당보 등을 니빠데 고랑 강니 용근도 대하고 그래서 고랑가 지대 강나 고랑금 정콩라 오데 강레다 나솔라 베나 나소 대밤존는 딘디 야르기 침보레 드니 차르크 락서크 드니 다 잠잠망봉 아준 초왕나라 토니 아준 초와나 할리바탑디보레 이나 따롱양 아란초 드니 셈거나라 마키바딘디 제외 제망 조야 김슨도 당보 강나요 디 통미 드니 정콩데 강나요 대하고 그래서.
If we're really going to go about solving this second kind of suffering, the most fundamental thing is to identify what its source is. So what is its root? What is its source? Where is it? What are its origin? Despite the fact that we have this, comparatively speaking, incredibly convenient, comfortable lifestyle, why is it that our suffering just keeps growing and growing? It's first extremely important to locate the cause.
드니 갸나라 드니 실라 저 라오수 드니 종야 드니 요시 드니 잔수반 고도와 드니 요레 티초서 하고 요스.
In China, there is a mouse trap called a sticky mouse trap or an adhesive mouse trap. I don't know if you've heard of it. Have you heard of this kind of mouse trap?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Tako mañona ngeti ndesi japgensi.
Well, if you haven't heard of it, I'll tell you about it.
Yeah. Te tambo kare tambo kole shanglip chongchong tin dichi yores.
So there is a thin wooden board.
Yeah. Tani ti thola tani de njariya njaro shin yores. Jansuba jiaoshui. Tani shin ti thola tani yores.
And then on top of that is a layer of sticky glue or adhesive substance.
Tani titola zamat chongchong shanda botendi chongchong titola jariores.
And then on top of that, very small particles of food or small meat particles are stuck.
Yeah. Ta ngaso kanglan dang jab go res na tondang ni tola ngaso samlo tang go res.
So there are two things that we need to think about in respect of this.
Tambo titola yopi zama chongchong tela samlo tango re ni pa titola yopi teni jin tela samlo tango re si chao shui tela.
So we have to think about the food particles and the glue.
Teni zama ti yona teni ngaso teni shila ga lao shu re 슐라가 자마데 요나 되니 코랑 자마데 자산 조니 틴디 조디 샹립 총총 티톨란 조디 되니 코랑 티톨란 젠로 그래지.
So when the mouse goes onto the trap, onto the sticky board to get the food, he will get stuck.
되니 자르니 코랑 되니 파 되니 꼭탑고 말이 티톨라 신로 그래지.
And is not able to leave the mousetrap, is stuck there and dies there.
야, 다 티톨라 코랑 자르니 되니 신로위 김천대 가ring 아주 대타고 그래지.
We really need to think about the reason why the mouse dies on the mousetrap.
김천 가리 삼근도 쾌랑 걸 란잡나 가리 삼근도.
Does anybody have an idea about why the mouse dies on the mousetrap?
Teni ko chese teni di longjok teni chese teni ko teni zamazaki chete teni ti pola yongya ko gyungzin ko shibare.
아지. 대치 그랬어.
Yes, that's one reason.
대치 그랬어. 야. 되니 쾌랑 건 따로 나치 잡다세 거나. 기 가리 삼근도. 대코 신로위 김천 가리스.
What do you think the other reason is?
It's karma.
Oh yeah. yeah, no, they 말이
Perhaps he is putting his worldly needs before his spiritual needs.
대 말이지.
No.
지태 씨바 보라. 가도.
말해. 그 직등 그거 봐. 그 되니 이제 제더니 최쇼던 직등 쇼니가 요래. 뭐야 되니 되니 그것도 그 직등 그니 되니 도바.
노바.
디 조다.
노바 되리 대치.
되니 그 최쇼 그도 되니 고바 조 된다기 요.
고바. 야야. 이제 대쇼치 그랬어.
Yeah, this is actually, yes, partially the case.
제대 다른 차 상화를 메두.
But not entirely complete.
당가서 디 라오슈 슐란즈야 데라페 르네 땅자보 요사리스.
수릭네 디자보.
데 땅자보 요사레 가서 라야포 잡탑 거메 득스.
Oh, this is in fact a very profound question and one that's extremely difficult to answer.
Yeah.
I know of the I create a track and the outcome is going to lose everything. First move it, benefit and lose everything.
되니 그 되니 펜토 총총 그치도 그 되니 밑에 창마 되니 쇼도 그래.
이제 대치 그랬어. 쇼치 그랬어.
And that is also one reason.
Yeah.
Another reason is greedy. He wants to eat. So that's why he's greedy. He want to eat, and then he didn't realize he actually lose the life.
되니 그 되니 도바 체차 그래.
제 대리스. 제대 카르테 코람도 바 치나 베나 맞소 샹립티 토라 마임바 잠바즈 그 토라 틴디 요나 코랑 손데 도바 침보 요나 코랑 자나야 경그 말이지.
However, that is the case. However, if he took the same greed and went upon a different surface to eat the food, then he wouldn't be wound up in the same situation.
되니 도바 치보 말이지.
So for that reason, we can't say it's on account of his greed.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Be an ignorant mouth.
Yeah.
Would he be an ignorant mouth?
거기는 되니 디 그것도 되니 하죠. 무지래.
Yeah, yes. There's.
Yes, that's true. He is.
Yeah. 다 돈다는 야.
The mouse doesn't have much understanding of the causes and conditions that the dependent arising, that if he eats the food, he's going to get stuck. So maybe an understanding, a deep understanding of dependent arising might.
되니 디 그거 패치 되니 규단게 되니 딘르그 콜라 고아 사포즈 요 말에. 되니 고 자메티 자나 되니 패치 코소 치즈 되니 코소 좀 톨라 되니 자투나 데 코시그 말에.
레 대연레 대치그레스.
Yes, that's right. That's also a reason. Very good.
Yeah.
Because the mouse has a body
Le.
Di nyang teni leki drebu di re. Teni di zo di ko nyumong tang teni jip drebu di re.
Yeah.
I say it's not the mouse's fault, it's the trap. It's so sticky.
Di ko teni zuku gyu yo mare. Di shinglep de hajong teni chizi teni kozo ke teni hajong teni jiao shui shuk chepo yubi gyumzeng ke. Oh ya teni zuku teni shit.
Re teni ta nga tso 샹립 디 토라 즈거데 신조 든디가 그런 거 든디 시송와리 디 nga mi mambo ndeshi mambo japsongse sir ti na dana na ndur dani shana pena jikin chik yana jikin ni na la sir dana kareris.
So all of these things are kind of right, and if we were to sort of bring them together and concentrate it into one point, what would that be?
Yeah, that's yeah, Kir. Yeah, they yak bore yeah.
That the mouse didn't know or didn't think, he didn't know that if he would go on the mouse trap that he would die. So it's the fact that he didn't know that.
Yeah. 다 nga cha chang song se.
Probably we're complete now.
Yeah. 강레제나 nga 좀 망치 슈즈 그 노바레제 송아시 데레스.
Probably most people attributed the main reason to the desire or the greed of the mouse.
데니 nga 좀 뭐 니가 콩다 콩 데니 뭐 니가 데니 주그 그런 거 맛이 받아 마고와 덴디레제 송세.
And then a couple of people spoke about the fact that the mouse was ignorant or not knowing of the fact that he would die if he went onto the mouse trap.
야, 단줄 송세. 베나 가서 데레스 데 가서 찍데 가레제나 즈그 그런 거 티톨라더니 코 티톨란 로나더니 파른 저니 신로레 삼바데 코 하고요 말레스. 데김슨 찍레스.
So one of the reasons is, yes, just that the mouse didn't know if he entered the mouse trap that he would die on its sticky surface.
근데 연 즈그 그런 거 샤디 그런 거 르소나더니 네 자고 삼니 노바 침부더니 겐도더니 데 니레스.
And the second reason that when the mouse saw the meat particles stuck on the surface of the mouse trap, the idea or the desire, oh, I need to eat that, arose in him.
Then ni po nani kartes chik tonta ni rwa ni ga nani kartes chik mesona ni ko shigo mares.
And of these two reasons, if one of them was not present, then the mouse wouldn't have died.
Karte khorang ko titola teni kon jarndo ya teni yo pate khorang ha ko sona teni khorang ko kangba titola mapo khorang thakala po ne kha ga teni za jana de ko rendo res.
If, for example, he knew that when he went on the mousetrap he would get stuck and die, then he could have placed his two little feet strategically on the edge of the board and stretched out his neck to get the meat instead.
Yeah. Teni khorang ga titolam jarndo ya teni yo ate ha maguna karte maguna yang teni khorang lam dopate mena te ko sha zasan ro mare te yang khorang shego mares.
So, in that situation, that thing
nga so perna karte khorang ga titola shanglip ko tola jarndo ya teni yo pate mashina yang karte khorang dopate mena yang ko shego mare ko zasan ro mares.
Notwithstanding whether or not he knew that, if he didn't have the desire to eat the meat in the first place, then he wouldn't also have needed to go onto the mousetrap.
Tani ta nga so ndorde tangzin gyarbo zera ze samodi wanjin zere ndorde tangzin gyarbo zya ti nangla tani nga so mi chama de tani khorwa ga nangla mara jarndo ya tela tani girkin ni yosone tani sonores.
And in the Sutra of King-like Concentration, I think it is, it's spoken of a similar situation of getting stuck on the mousetrap. 2 points are mentioned.
Tati gangrezena tani chigde gangrezena ta marug pares sonores.
So the first of these reasons is ignorance.
Marug pati gangrezena marug pati mashi pares mago ares.
In ignorance, we just mean not knowing, not understanding.
The kyoran is giteres kyoda kyoran is giteres.
And that is the reason. That is what you two both were saying.
마시바다 마고 김승지에서.
Not knowing and not understanding.
내가 저 낭바 낭라 데라 마르 빠지 그래서.
And in Buddhism, we refer to this as ignorance.
더니 니바테 드니다 제빠즈는 도파레스 가서 도데 낭라 스트릿 마르 왕기 송요리 스트릿 지도 스트팔라 제빠즈는 도파레스 도파 더니 도파가 왕거 도파다 마르 빠더니 니포 왕거 더니 가총 코라가 나라 드리시는 코르고 그래서 오늘 드리 송요레스.
And then the second reason is our desire, as was mentioned, and it's on account of these two reasons, the ignorance and the desire, that we continually spin around in samsara. And that reason was spoken of by many people. So when we talk about the 6 realms of beings, or the 6 realms of samsara, we can liken this to the sticky mouse trap. And we all are rats or mice. And the reason that we get stuck and the reason we keep spinning is precisely for these two things. We don't know, we don't understand, and on account of our desire and greed. So in order to change this or to transform ourselves, it's necessary for us to learn, to study.
par 메바제야고 동달라 되는 아주 로종시니 되니 르바 결혼하고 추석 망대래 르바디고 그래서.
So in order to do away with our ignorance it's necessary for us to study and to cultivate our rikpa, which is auspiciously the name of the center.
Yeah. Then 결혼서 소리를 보지 르바지니 망 다야데
And then probably the reason that Sodhya Rinpoche chose the name Rigpa for the name of his institution was in order so that his students did not get stuck on the trap.
됐지 그래서 니빠데 당아랑서양 노빠데양 아서양 갈메바체고 그래서.
And the other thing that we've got to do is gradually reduce our desire and greed. Reducing our desire all of our desires in an immediate way is, of course, extremely difficult. So in terms of the rat, it's not to say that it's completely not all right for it to eat any meat at all. However, what it should stay away from is the meat on top of the mousetrap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in order that we can do this, it was for this purpose that we engage in study.
mar mepacheya tondala tini ngacho nyamling chigore ma to ba tini ngacho ripi jonglu ko tone o tinti rendu samba ngacho ta langsang chama hako song ngacho o pe tinti le lapo ko tone o ngacho tin khorwa nangla yoati jimchen ni de rendu tin arancho ta na tinti rendu ta sangji tinti songdu samba te ripi jonglu ko tone ngacho ta hako song res inang ngacho nyamling mena pandoyo mare.
So in terms of reducing our desire, the most important thing is our practice. Just having an intellectual or a conceptual understanding of the role of desire and ignorance in getting ourselves stuck is not enough. To know that it's what the Buddha said and this is how it works without putting it into practice is not going to get us very far.
샹립 그 돌아가 샤티 자냥가 말에 제나 가서 샹립 돌아요 비 샤티 강리 되니 때 마임비 샤티 강리 제나 때 가서 요 시시고 그래서
So just as I said just now that it's okay for the mouse to eat meat that's not on the mousetrap, but it should stay away from the meat that is on the mousetrap, it's necessary for us to be able to discriminate between substances or objects in a similar way.
되니 다 가서 도물 가서 빼나 가서 다 출라로중 자반이 시 맘용큰 든지 뭐 있나 양나 가서 직된 되니 뭐 파와 든지 있나 되니 코랑 그 멋지가 나라 되니 멋지가 되니 싸위 싸와 무이런 자고데 강아지나데 코랑 골몸 보사야한다다 되니 코랑 소소랑 그 개보자야 강바침보뇨야 되니 랑코르 즉보뇨야 되니 리포라 곰바다 되니 크마다 소상마 딱마 되니 망보 용큰 되니 송딱 딱마 되니 즉보 민파지죠 디 짝딱전 되니 되니 잘락상마 되니 지야 되니 티스치보 마토 잠바 삼바케게 메 티스치보 돌랑 공코르네 티스치보도 돈드니 티스치보들란 도바침보요 딜리 잠바 지치삼노타 마시나 되니 가서 딘다윈도 파트니 샹립고 토고 샤자완다 보레스
So we can liken the meat on the mousetrap to a person who has never heard the word of the Dhamma, an extremely ordinary person who has as their primary purpose in life accumulating wealth, accumulating material possessions, obtaining worldly pleasures, being concerned primarily and only with these things.
되니 당아 저거 셈낭라 되니 nga yinda manda ngarang tharwa thobgo samba ga tindi go ngarang ko mchi go tini muir te kangyin zena mchi go ranthang mchi go muir te kangyin zena te ngarang khorwa ga nani tharwa thorgo samba ti la ngimjong ko samba je gre ti samba te karte nga chola yona te yo sonas
the idea or the notion that in this lifetime, I must attain liberation. This wish or this aspiration, what we call the mind of renunciation. Once we have this,
that the tarwa ngarang ka machega tini ngaso ngarang ka machega muirang omati nge tarwa thobgo ngarang khorwa nani tarwa thobgo sambi samlo ti nguni tane yona tini ti jini 교랑 강바 침보고 나라 되나 저거래 교랑 랑코르 약보즈 코르나 저거래 요 자마 약보즈 자나 저거래 되니 교랑 그 되니 딱마 요사가 되니 곰바 견나 저거래 디갑 그 되니 가서 강바다 되니 랑코르다 저 자마 샹립 그 돌라 메피 샤잠바디 소레스
After we have truly been able to arouse this aspiration, we've truly been able to arouse renunciation, and that is a sincere desire in this lifetime to be liberated from samsara, then from this point onwards, then if we have a big house, that's fine. If we wear brand name clothes, that's fine. After this point, these things we can consider as meat that is not on top of the mousetrap.
Teni ngaso nangba je bagazena ngaso chu nyamlin chena gom gyamna zode nangba chu nyamlin chena teni ngaso chowa dugbo kir gore teni ta indambanda teni kapshin mambo che gore zini teni zeg marez.
So in terms of being a Buddhist practitioner, it's not necessary that we have to have an extremely deprived lifestyle or an extremely difficult lifestyle. That's not being requested of anyone.
Teni tumba sanji shakja thapa tangbo teni korang gyarbo phobjanga nane par sone teni lo chugla teni korang ka kawashan ne teni dawa re ga nangla nemje teni chongchong chigre da chithma teni chigrin thongne teni kashit chini lo chugla teni kashit chini gom gyawares.
When Shakyamuni left his princely palace, for the first 6 years he endured all kinds of ascetic practices and subsisted on an extremely meager kind of diet.
Teni lo chuk jis teni tomba sarje ga teni thugla teni o tandi lam dendi tu ga tharatop go na tharatop tep ko mendu gong ne teni par ying ne teni zozu bomo teni to kongla teni oma teni yar priori teni oma de jine teni ota kapshit chipo thara top top ko mandu zo te rigpa yang ta pa yogo ndu samne teni jagar dorjidal la sone teni nel ko ton tone te korang sanji songare de la pe kwa chimbolengi yoris.
And it was after these 6 years that he suddenly had the realization or reached the understanding that by pursuing this ascetic path, he was not going to achieve liberation. And he came to this understanding or came to this knowledge, was offered the relieving drink of milk, and from this point onwards, determined to go to Bodh Gaya, where he eventually obtained enlightenment.
Teni tela koa chimbo kare lengi yorizina tanga cho lipo utola dengmer mambo nyane pena nga cho zama degbo za chowa degbo kir o tindin rabo shina di tharwa thop thop ko marezi ti nga cho nil ko de thachu shi thop ko marezi cho de nga cho shiba rigba de yosona nil ko ton de shi sona o teni korang yakbo yong gore pena nga cho zgla samlo tana korang ga zajeme korang thongjime tendrishina ko deli kyang shade za samyong gore zi zgla samlo tana deli zg de na zo kola gari gong de zena korang ga sha zana yang shanglip ko thona yo bi shade maza wa ji sha jamba za wa da dinji ga shanglip ko thola yo bi shade zana korang ti tola ngyarng ro gore samgiti kortok de zgla yo go ang ma ti tere ma to ba 대수 지직 맞고나 zg korang tini kable mambo jab tini korang degbu nyang tini shiba pandoyo maris.
So the important thing in terms of advancing us on the path to liberation is having a correct understanding, a correct knowledge. In terms of the mouse or the rat undergoing all kinds of hardship, being deprived and having nothing to eat, having nothing to drink is only going to make him want that piece of meat all the more. So the important thing is that he obtains the correct understanding that that is not the meat that he should be eating, that he should be concerning himself with meat that is elsewhere.
Teni ngazo nangba sanji pa molum jabna molum kandi jab gorezina teni ngazo sangma tsindi tola demo ki bo yongya tang teni tsifshimala teni tharwa tobya teni zegere ma to ba ngazo tsindi tola dugbu yongje da tsifshimala tharwa tobze teni molum jab gomarez. Ngazo nangba sanji pa molum jabna teni ngazo tsindi tola demo ki bo yongya tang teni tsifshimala tharwa toba teni molum jab gore. 마통가서 센티 토라 득부용 야당 자기미 견기미 득부용 셉시말라 타라토지 딘디고 몰음 잡고 말이지.
So in terms of when we make a prayer to the Buddha, what we should be asking for is that we do enjoy happiness and comfort in this lifetime and liberation in the next. We certainly shouldn't be praying for hardship and suffering to come upon us in this lifetime and liberation in the next.
덴지 인디 다 아주 사마 즈 인디 되니 즈 거랑 거 샤자고 그래 이나 상립 토크 샤디 마자나 덴지 그요레스.
So again, the mouse can have some meat to eat. It should just not be having the meat on the trap.
덴이 아주 사마 즈 인디 가솔라 샤 마자지나 덴이 강터 가서 신조 그래 상립 토크 자나 시그래 잠바즈 마자나 시그래 강터 시지레스.
So in terms of being a mouse, if we don't eat any meat, well, in any case, we're going to die. So, yes.
Yeah. 다 딘딩 아서 간디고 그래제나 더니 나서 베나 저다 뭐 가시거나 베나 가서 곰 잡니 something 곰바 딘디 요사레제 가서 베나 르바고 추송나라 딘디 요사레 네 가시는 지 조바침보금 근자다 딘디 요사레지 강터 페나가 조디니 조바침보금나 안자 딘디 something journey 딘디 곰나 안자 강 곰나야 토머 딘디 나랑 타르와 투고 삼바가 삼로 디 삼로 셈탁 정짓 딘디 또 삼로 여러 메바 딘디즈 요고 그레스 갑쇼 딘디즈 고그레스.
So in terms of people here, people at Rikpa or people here tonight, probably there are people who practice calm abiding meditation. Perhaps there are others who practice Dzogchen meditation. Irrespective of the type of meditation that one might practice, the most important thing is that first we have a proper direction, a correct direction, and that is an unshakable, unfaltering vow of or aspiration to obtain in liberation.
Teni nga tso mo kashi tindi zegrezi. Teni nga tso nga tarwa top matome 상기 마기메다 nga 할리바 기포렌도 나랑 초와테 빼 기포레 든지 옛나다 nga 초완디나라 나랑 등을 가게면도와 대나데 nga 타라토 그 김성 가레레지 든지 생긴 요레지.
There are some people, of course, who say, well, you know, I'm not really concerned with liberation. I'm not particularly fussed whether or not I achieve Buddhahood. My life is pretty good. I don't have much suffering. So why do I need to generate this aspiration?
땡아서 따르땅아랑서 좋아되니 기부요 땡아서 코리양 약보요 좋아양 약보요 땡지요나 땡이 땡아랑서 직대는 아랑 소소고 끼와 엄마가 되니 소소고 소름 사바레스 니 땡아랑서 친디 돌아 소소랑 그 갑리 잡니 땡지 용바레 때 할리바 약보레지 제때 나서 나 따르따 기부 데모인들이 내 저때니 타라톱고 말해제나 te samlo de haliba tab diburezi ina ngaso tarta yabo ina maungbala tindi yabo yongzeguna pe khaborezi.
So this idea that we're good, we're well enough in our present circumstances, if we are, it's on account of our previously accumulated good karma. It may also in part be due to our efforts and endeavors in this lifetime. This is all very good and well. However, to think that we are going to enjoy this state in the future is something quite difficult. Even though it's perhaps easy for us to think about this, it's unlikely to be the case.
Pena ngacho tarta teni ngacho pamjur jachimboyo teni sosorangla tenita goya ngbo chama yo tenita sosorong par halipa ta ngakipore sambandawa ta ngarang kun soatita ta dewajanina ta tele labo yo yogi mare samba tendisi inayang te ngacho nerkap tindi rema to ba ta ngacho kale ngacho lore song la ngacho zubunde teni kale genro rez.
And even if it is the case that we do have a very fortunate present existence, it's undeniable that as each year passes, we are inevitably going to age.
Teni give water teni ngaso teni da sugarezi teni shitari jini teni yankir ngaso la tartin soanda ondendi yoze gona tetez kabores.
And then it's inevitable that we will die. And then after we die, to return to an existence of the same material standard is probably quite difficult.
Teni tindi indi ngaso maungbala teni samlo tangata nyigyan rambo la samlo tangate pekar chimpore.
So it's extremely important that we have a long-term view, that we project into the future.
Tindi yenata ngaso maungbaga teni natun sama tak teni ta ngaso tapshi chila teni sama gangan teni partak choya tak cho twya di gangrezina teni ngaranso ge ga nan chi korwa nani taran rowa teni shonsona teni natun sama dungur sama teni takchon jogres.
Really, the only reliable means of solving and addressing absolutely every suffering is to transcend samsara and its various sufferings of birth, of aging, of sickness, of death.
Tani tindi indi ngaso samlo de ta ngaso ngimjong ko sambazina ngaso ta ngarang tharwa thopgo samba samlo de tani kani yonggo rezina de ngaso ngondro tani ngondro lodro namba jizini se martak bare tamjo nyeka bare tani se martak bare tani legimri tani korwa dungri te so jibo te tani samlo tani gomgo re te gomna tani ngaso ta ngimjong ko sambati kyong gres.
And in order to do this, it's extremely important that we arouse renunciation. And the way that we go about training in this is through the outer preliminary practices, the four thoughts that turn the mind.
Teni yang ngaso teni lama haliba teni tachi lama mambo ngaso bokerina lama haliba teni lama yekshu lama angdang bodu sama teni shirjir ko lomba sasa lomba soso nala yore tendi yendi teni lama titso teni kamdan ni chu teni jia ta teso tezo keso shirjir ko tendi la samlo ta tezo le labon ra yore te yo charti teni chama go te le labore samne tendi dang jab go yore.
And after this, then it's important to receive teachings from a Lama. In terms of the best or the most extremely qualified Tibetan teachers, there are many in Western countries, and in order to go before them and receive teachings is something for Westerners, if we think about it, is comparatively easy or convenient.
Teni yendi teni nga tsoma kashi ga sanlo ta la nge zoba chimbo gom gu yenze teni nge shagja chimbo gom gu yenze teni ge chun thumbu te so gom gu yenze ma ta nge o chi ngonjo da o da se marta da te so te chi ngarang ge te gom gum man te so ramba hali ba ma bore ngarang ge ramba thumbu te gom gu yen sam ni teni sam go yores.
But on account of this, quite a lot of people think that I will practice the highest practices for myself, Mahamudra or Dzogchen. I'm not going to concern myself with basic stuff like renunciation and meditating on impermanence and things like this.
Te zoba chimbo gomna pe yakbore ze rete yinna teni nga so rimbi rogo re ma to ba teni yung ma re ze pe na nga so lobja ga na ne ramjum ba da teni ramjum ba kongma teni ndona yang tangbo lobchong ne lomjang dang teni rimbi rogo re ma to ba nga so lobchong na la yang monjo lomjang na la yang monjo teni taka ngarang ramjum ban dong yin ze na te yung ma re was.
Of course, it's wonderful to practice Dzogchen. However, there is a process, a series of steps that we must follow in terms of being able and qualified to practice it. It's like studying in school. One doesn't immediately arrive at the stage of a doctor or a postdoctorate. It's important to go through the stages.
Tani te nga so ngonjo te yangpo gom jana tani nga so gilang ngimjong ko sambati ke yong re tani ngimjong ko sambati ke charti teni nga zo tari gongna shepa ndopa tang marikpa nigana ni ndopa ti mepa tsabani mepa marita yena ndopa ti mepa nda wori tsapchin ndopa tsapchin ti mepa re song re teni nga zo ta dondaga ni tacho che go inang ka dondaga chikti parchirer teni tacho che tsar song re si ngimjong de yo na.
So in terms of these two things that we identified before that are really important, our addressing both our desire and our ignorance, once we're able to generate renunciation through having meditated on the preliminary practices, then essentially more or less we'll have addressed the first of these problems, the problem of desire or of greed. Of course, to have eradicated desire or greed at its most subtle level, it's unlikely that we'll have done this, but in terms of its most coarse or large or problematic manifestations, then generating true renunciation will enable us to address this.
Teni ti kormti nga zo teni bog chu na la teni ngonjo nguj zene teni rimbe korm teni dujag do te nga zo lobja chongchong da lomjang da lobchin da teni chibore te korm de ramba jindon roa te pe kar chimbore.
So in terms of the Tibetan Buddhist practice, following the preliminaries is extremely important in terms of a process, a procedure, a set of gradual stages. It's extremely important that we complete this process properly.
Tani tang nimjong de yosona ti nga zo tondak chi de tak chu cha chi tani ta tondak ni pa di gandri go ni ta cha go re zena tani ta nga zo la marikpa de mepa che gona teni nga zo rikpa ishi te teni yogo re rikpa ishi te yosona teni nga zo marikpa de mepa che res.
So after we have addressed the first problem of desire, then we need to attend to the second obstacle, and that is ignorance. And in order to do this, it's essential that we generate true knowledge, true understanding, true wisdom.
Teni rikpaziyati teni tele yang kamore tele labu mare ze ngara so ta rikpa ishi ze nele ke ton tok zena yana tomba ni ke ton tok zena yana zogba chimbo ton tok zena teni tok chokore ze pena nga so terang dana yong ken sama la te gorkupti yore ze te mi sama la te gorkupti yore jete ina mi sama rimbe rona gorkup yore ma to ba teni nga so rimbe manjona gorkup yore mare ze.
In terms of this second wisdom that we're talking about, or wisdom of primordial awareness, this is something that's difficult to obtain. However, it is something that every single person here tonight is possible of doing. However, in order to do that, it is vital that we do follow the proper steps in getting there.
근데 조바 침보 되니 돈데 되니 똑 살비 지니 되니 간데린도 지나다 가서 셈낭라 되니 마르바 데 짜바 마르바 데 메바리 되니 도차가레 되니 제당레 도서 상마 름비 되니 다 칼레 마르체마 린도 레스.
And after we are able to do this, after we have gained this realization, then we will have addressed the second problem of ignorance. And from this point onwards, our difficulties will gradually be less and less and less.
되니 조바 침보티 똑소나 되니 가서 베나 대랑 가서 조바 침보 똑소나 되니 람상 되니 가서 되니 뇽몽바 참마말 메바 되니 로레제 되니 로 마레제.
However, this is not saying that as soon as we have a realization in the great perfection or a realization of emptiness, that immediately all of our obscurations disappear, or all of our negative afflictive emotions disappear. It doesn't work like this.
Tani ngatsu zogba chimbo te yakbo z gone tani te toksona tani kandi rezena darong yang ngatsu semganala dochak kegerezena te kegerez jerdang kegerezena kegerez nyomongba jamba yang yo orezena darong yang yorez yo rete inna tani ngatsu zogba chimbo martok padang tok sarvi tani kapsala tani khabar chimbo yorez.
So is it the case that after we have realized the nature of emptiness that we no longer generate negative emotions such as desire or hatred? Well, no, this is not the case. It's likely that at some extent we still generate these, we still experience these emotions or negative states of mind. However, there is a difference between the state we were in before we had this realization and afterwards in respect of how we approach these thoughts as they manifest.
Teni khabar kandizan do zena tarde ngaso teni to zogba chimbo to martok pi kongdo pe na ngaso la je ndochak kena je dang kena nyomba gandang kang kena ti kandizre zena pe na gangkha teni sacha pe tramu o teni la teni gangkha lakba jamna long jamna teni gangkha long te halipa chakbo teni jeze teni nongar dang damba teni jere gangkha tabe na ngaso boba sa chanda yamanam te maimba sakola shangshoko teni sacha teni mambozla gangkha halipa teni te chamu reze ti kapse long jawona teni long te halipa lipo thola yona ta lipo teni pakba thola muzu pandawo teni yongre to
we can liken the state that we are in before we arrive at realization to a person who, in the midst of winter in a really cold place, like in Tibet or another place, perhaps in the northern hemisphere, when the winter wind blows extremely strongly, and when that sensation touches one's body, it feels so strong and so unbearable. This is what it is like when we experience negative afflictions in the pre-realized state.
Tani pena ngaso tartanda boina pena ngaso mi jamba chiga tenga chola jing ngaso semla margaya tenji kaja sheyuna kaja shana tenga so lamsam controlang gare controlang ngaso dongba marbore ndore ke tsani ba to bombon dinjin ndore ngore tani mila tani tsingen tinji tsoba tinji shagare tani to yang tarong teli tez dugna tani ta yarlang ni jab gore o tinji gore nga so tarta yena.
In terms of our current condition at the moment, if someone says something not kind to us, then immediately we experience anger and our face turns red and we want to do something. If in an extreme way we might stand up and start to beat someone. This is how we are in our current state of being.
Tani zoba chimbo totsari jini anteni ta lamsang control me patin dire ke mare tarong ne ka yori rete 디 값스더니다 간디스레즈나 베나 땡아조 시카 야나 똥카 베나 카 따타 오스트레일리아 따타 디스다오 딘지 값라 베나 롱자오나 롱데 테트데즈 장무레데나 단 잠보자오레 잠보자오 마토타 할리파 치슈사마 딘지가 딘지 용거 말이지 딘지 용탑거 말이 파스포트 탐주야라 상용완자다 딘지 용거면도 와지 롱데 테트 잠보자오레지 딘자보레지 조바침보 똑살위지니.
However, after we have realized the nature of reality in Dzogchen practice, then the experience of bracing wind is somewhat different. Although it's probably a bit like the weather now in Canberra. Although there's a bit of wind and it's a bit cold and all of that kind of thing, it's not so unbearable. In fact, it sort of comes across us in a rather sort of gentle or soft way. So it's not to say that we don't on occasion experience some anger or anything like that, but the way that we perceive it or the way that we experience the intensity of the affliction is not as extreme.
Teni ti kaps pena mi jamba so ngarang so la chi teni ngarang so margaya ta teni kaja sha pa yin da le ka le teni jeona tenga so te semna la marga teni yongore khongcho tiegre te ine lamsang teni ta khongcho kina teni kini lamsang khoyang teni mebarin res.
So in the post-realized state, when perhaps people say things that don't please us or do things that don't please us, sure, it's possible that anger arouses in us, but it arises and then it immediately passes away.
Benangacho zobachimbo martok pi kongdo benangarancho semgo nala yo pitini nyomongba namtok teso karezna benangacho shobo tola remote yata bre shobo tola ngacho nyego remote na deni chet yana ch yana te par noya tindiz ka mahnona kolamsang me pare ka mare tenja ores.
In the pre-realized state, it's when negative afflictive emotions arise or other conceptual thoughts arise. It's rather like a picture or drawing on a piece of paper. Once it's on it, we can't really erase it by scrubbing at it with water.
Tani zogba chimbo to tsarwi jine te nga zo nyomong ba kang rezina te chigo nang la remote ba ta warisi chigo nang la te remote na remote chigo re ta tani yar len sar te tani me ba chak sar te da chig ba res.
In the post-realized state, it's like a drawing that has been done on the surface of water, so that while it's in the process of being drawn, we can see its form, but as soon as that stops, it fades away of its own accord.
Tani tinji je sona tani nga zo sem ga nang la tani tinji ga sherb rigba chimbo te tani yo chardi tani nga zo chowa ga nang la dungur kangda kang yo nan ja tani le ga ga thoni dungur yin nan chowa ga nang ne yong wi dungur tani nga zo kyomsang ga nang ne yong bi tani dungur jam mambo kanji yong na dungur te so tam lamsang tani khorang par me ba tani chi thab gres.
So in this post-realized state, whatever suffering that we encounter in life, whether it be suffering in work, in our family lives, in our personal lives, physical suffering, etc., it may come, but it very quickly subsides.
Tani ti kapsang aso soso rang tini dungur teso mepa tini che thavya tini yong songdi tani tarung muntha ne tini gomgyap tini shine gomgyap thasona tani aso ta tari nyomba tezi yoya deyang mepa chakne tani tan tar tini aso nyomba shikyang mepa perna mi jamba zig tini aso kyo mit digbo rezi kyo kumma rezi tini chakba rezi marab rezi tini shena ti jati tini 네 카우가 나라 용네 되는 아주 나와가 나라고 나가서 나와가 기모디 알모 나와가 기모딩 거거리지 자티 나와나 거리나 코 샘팅 거거 말이지 코 샘팅 거탑고 말이지.
And after we have obtained realization and we are able to continue to stabilize our wisdom or our understanding through meditation, then it doesn't really matter if, regardless of what people say, the sound reaches our ear. The sound might stimulate the membranes of our ear, but there is no sensation that stirs in the heart.
Tene pena tartanta boina pena musik chom dugbori chom marbrezi tene zejana ti jati tene khawkanani yoni ti lab dag labti tene ngarang nawa gurgure nawati nawa nang chimoti ndargrezi tele jangarang sim din dargrezi so ngomade.
However, where we are at the moment, if someone says nasty things to us, like you're a thief, you're a bandit, you're a this, you're a that, then not only do the sound waves stimulate our the membrane in our ears, our minds are stirred in a very drastic way.
Ta tinti ending ato terang chaya shapatela kangrezina jigdomna srun jigdomna ta ngacho khorwa ngala khorbi gemsente aka soso chamaga songsong aze ngacho chigde marig parendo se nitin do parendo te ni res chugdomna.
So if we're going to summarize, put in essence what we've spoken about tonight, then the first thing, obviously, we've spoken about the reasons why we are stuck in samsara.
Teni te niti par meba cheyala teni ngacho sanggiga teni lama gongma namgo kanti songozena teni chiti ngacho ngimjong gos teni nite ngacho sherab gos rpa gos tenika gore ten yosona teni ngimjong yona ngacho doba meparin rore teni korwang nalang koreang doba te meparin rore teni rpa te yona teni ngacho margpa te mepare kare te nipo te teni ta mepa resona mepa chevjana teni nga chung korwa nga la ten korgo mare nga chu ti shanglip ti tolan jarni shirgo mares.
So the two things that we spoke about in terms of the two things, desire and ignorance, that are the reasons that we stay stuck in samsara. Tonight we talked about how we go about addressing these through relying on the teachers of the past and the teachings of the Buddha to generate renunciation and to generate wisdom, and through practicing these, putting them into practice, enable ourselves to not have to cycle any longer in samsara and not to wind up stuck on top of the mousetrap.
Teni tenila tabshi ni reze tabshi chide kangreze na ngacho nimjong kiaga tabshi teni ngacho ngonro gomgo reze techi reze.
And so in terms of how we go about working on these two things, renunciation and wisdom, the first is to work on the preliminary practices, and it's through meditating on the preliminary practices, putting them into practice, that we are able to generate renunciation.
Tani sherp ta rigba tikia ga tondala tani ngacho yangna oma gomgo re yangna shagja chimbo gomgo re yangna zoba chimbo gomgo re te gomgo re te tabshi ni res.
In terms of cultivating the necessary wisdom, then we need to meditate on emptiness, meditate on the great perfection or the Mahamudra. So this is the second method or strategy we need to adopt.
Teni ngaranso terang teni chuchete sar duna teni tondak jigres teso jigderes.
So if I'm going to put in a nutshell what we've spoken about tonight, then there are essentially 6 points.
Teni te jigde tani ngaso kyun ni res ngaso shanglip tolam jaria ga kyun ni res.
The first is the two problems or the two causes that wind ourselves up stuck on the mousetrap.
Teni kyun teni par meba cheya ga teni te ngubo ni res kyun meba shi tachu cheya ga teni tonda ni res.
And then I spoke of the two things that will enable us to do away with these problems and enable us not to be stuck on the mousetrap.
Teni tondak te ni teni kangri guni ngaso meba ni yoba kandi chego res ni ti tabshi ni res kyun domna jigres.
And then the final two things I spoke about are the methods or strategies that we adopt in order to generate the two things that will enable us to not be stuck on the mousetrap.
Tani ta tab dibushiniana tiri telejan go maris.
So, really putting it in a very convenient, pithy sense, that's all we need, nothing else.
Ta mambushina haliba mambu yorite charkiyo maris.
In terms of all the things it's possible to talk about, they're never ending.
Yeah. Ta tinga sha charson.
So, that is all I have to say tonight.